1C, absolute value equations. So first we're going to get a reminder of what absolute value is. So the absolute value of a number is its distance from 0 on a number line. And because it is a distance, it is always positive. So for example here, the first thing we have is the absolute value of 5. Okay, so 5 is, of course, 5 places away from 0, so the absolute value is 5. But if I have negative 5, that's also 5 places away from 0, so the absolute value of negative 5 is also 5. Alright, first thing we're going to do here is evaluate an expression with absolute value. So I'm going to plug 2 in for b. So I have the absolute value now of negative 6 times 2. Alright, something that you need to remember when we're simplifying expressions with absolute value is that you need to do any operations that are inside the absolute value first before you take the absolute value and make it positive. So negative 6 times 2 would be negative 12, and then the absolute value of negative 12 is 12. Alright, when we have absolute value equations, we're going to set it up so that we have two separate answers. So I'm going to say x minus 12 equals 32, and then also x minus 12 equals negative 32, because remember, if I have something in here that is equal to negative 32 and I take the absolute value, it's still going to be positive. So I have two different solutions here. And then we solve it just like regular solving equations. Alright, so I have two different possible answers. Here x would be 44, and here x would be negative 20. So both of those are possible solutions for this equation. Okay, when you're solving absolute value equations, the absolute value part has to be by itself before you set up your two equations. So like if I took this one, I would need to divide by 2, divide by 2. So now I have the absolute value of x minus 12 equals 16. And then I can set up my two equations, x minus 12 equals 16, x minus 12 equals negative 16, and solve from there just like normal. So I'm going to add 12. X equals 28, and if I add 12 to both sides here, I get x equals negative 4. Alright, so I want you to pause here and try example C, and then come back and give me your answers. Make sure you have it right. Alright, so hopefully you got 30 and negative 6 for these. Alright, then one more little wrinkle that we have here, since absolute value has to be positive, we've already talked about that, it's possible that you could have an equation with no solution, and that happens whenever you have the absolute value by itself and then a negative number on the other side. So the absolute value of x cannot equal negative 5. It's not possible, because anything I put in here is going to be positive. Same thing here, absolute value cannot equal negative 9. It's not possible. Alright. Here I would have to get the absolute value part by itself first. So I would have the absolute value of x minus 9 is equal to negative 5, and then that would be no solution because it's not possible for me to get a negative number out of an absolute value. Okay. The other thing that is possible when we're doing absolute value is to have something called an extraneous solution, and that's when we solve it but then plug that answer back into the original equation and it doesn't work. Okay, so let's take this as an example. I would have my two equations, x plus 6 equals 3x minus 2, and then I also have x plus 6 equals, and I'm going to make the whole thing negative, 3x minus 2. So we're going to solve this just like a normal equation. I'm going to move my x's to the left side. So I would have negative 2x plus 6 equals negative 2. Subtract 6 from both sides. And divide by negative 2. And I get x equals 1. Alright, so that's one solution. Over here, the first thing I would need to do is distribute my negative. So x plus 6 equals negative 3x plus 2. And then same thing, I'm going to solve. So I'm going to move my x's to the left side. 4x plus 6 equals 2. And then I just noticed that I made a mistake over here. Hopefully you caught it when I was doing it. Teachers are not immune from mistakes, so right here, -2 minus 6, that should actually be -8, which would change my answer to +4. So my two answers that I got is x equals 4 and x equals -1. Now I have to check to make sure that neither of those are extraneous. And the way I do that is I take my original equation and I plug in my answer. So I would have the absolute value of 4 plus 6 equals 3 times 4 minus 2. And I'm going to see if this is true. So 4 plus 6 is 10. And then 3 times 4 is 12 minus 2. The absolute value of 10 is 10. 12 minus 2 is also 10. So that one works. X equals 4 is a valid solution. Now I'm going to do the same thing with the x equals -1. So I have the absolute value of -1 plus 6 is equal to 3 times -1 minus 2. -1 plus 6 is 5. 3 times -1 is -3. So the absolute value of 5 is 5. -3 minus 2 is -5. This is not true. So that means that x equals -1 is an extraneous solution. It does not work. So this absolute value equation only has one answer. Alright, that's it for absolute value equations.